Within a day of arriving in Spiritvale, Mother let it be known she had been taught by the famous Maggie Fox. And a couple with Aunt Lily's often teary-eyed endorsement, it made her an instant celebrity. Revealed among the other mediums and sought after by many clients seeking contact with their lost loved ones. Mother's approach was what she called scientific and mystical, modern yet rooted in traditional spiritualism. Everything vibrates. It became Mother's motto, a phrase with mysterious, enigmatic, yet sounded so knowing and wise she was almost never questioned further. It seemed to explain so much, even when no one really knew what she meant. Her delivery was artful, eyes narrow with a distant gaze. She would nod a little as she conversed her message in a voice thick with pretentious meaning. Everything vibrates. Then she would incline her head forward and gesture that asked, "Now do you understand?" She didn't wait for a reply because it was technically understood that one did understand. My sister Blythe was born at the end of 1898, right there in Spiritvale. Mother was aided by a medicine woman midwife from the Oneida tribe, Princess Running Deer, who doubled as a baby channel, a medium spiritualizing in contacting child who had passed on as babies. I think I'll name her Blythe Onya Taylor, Mother considered one day while rocking on the porch with baby Blythe in her arms. Tesla is also a nice name. I suggest Blythe Tesla Taylor. Tesla, the scientist we met? I nod. What does he have to do with us? You say his words. Everything vibrates. She nodded, seeming to consider the idea for a moment, and then she shook it off. Onya is more fitting. I think all our middle name shall be Onya from now on. It will benefit our new life here. And so my mother put a wood sign on the porch of our white cottage, like so many other plaques around town advertising Maud Onya Taylor, medium, Chandler. Mimi, Emma, Amelie, Little Blythe, and I became known as Onya Taylor sisters. Mimi says she didn't like it, and if Mimi didn't like the new name, then neither did I. Blythe was too young to care, and Emma claimed it was all right by her. Amelie said nothing. She never did. From the day of the seance at the Treadwell home, I never heard Amelie speak another word. She made sounds, laughed, cried, and even hummed, but never a word that she would speak. As soon as we were settled in Spiritvale, Mother took Amelie to a specialist in Ontario, Canada. As far as he could tell, Amelie could talk. She understood the words that were and what they meant. She just chose not to say anything. After that, the five of us went to Syracuse so Mother could talk to a psychologist about Amelie. He suggested that a severe trauma might be the root of her refusal to speak. It had been known to happen. Could we think of any such trauma? I volunteered and told him about the seance and how baby Amelie seemed to be seeing something that none of us could. And from that day on, she never spoke again. You are telling me that your sister was frightened by a ghost? The psychologist inquired skeptically. No, that's not what happened, Mother said. It was an earthquake, a vibration that must have shaken her vocal cords loose. You were in an earthquake? In New York City? Again, the psychologist seemed very doubtful. As I could have been myself, had I not been there. Yes, indeed, you were correct. It was highly unusual, Mother said, disarming him with the most charming smile. I don't believe her vocal cords were shaken, the psychologist ventured. It's more likely that she was traumatized by the tremendous fear she felt during the quake. So that became our official story for Emily. She had been rendered mute by the ordeal of the quake. Mother preferred that story, I think because it absolved her of all the blame. If she had conjured something from the spirit world that had so affected her baby, her guilt would have been too enormous to bear. As I grew older, I took to watching Mother carefully, trying with all my power to observe, to discern if she could really contact the spirit world, or if she had simply hit upon a way to use her innate powers of showmanship to make money. She would sometimes do something that many of the mediums in town did, called automatic writing. In a apparent trance state, she would hold up a blank slate, and the spirit being contacted was supposed to imprint the message on the slate. It had become my habit to sneak under the table once the lights were out. More than once I caught sight of her writing feverishly on a second blackboard on her lap, and then producing the board as though the spirit had written the message on it. One time, as a joke, I scribbled "Hello, Mother" in the corner of the board when it was resting on her feet, writing to be produced. Luckily, her client took it as a message from a child who had died as a toddler, and was delighted to see that her son had learned to write in the afterlife. Nonetheless, Mother was not amused and made sure to kick around under the table before every seance to be sure I wasn't lurking there, writing to cause mischief. Still, among the townspeople there were those mediums thought to be most flagrant and others who were revealed for their ability. My mother was among the most respected. Due to her everything vibrates model, she was even considered something of a scientist. Maud Onya Taylor has studied with the greatest minds of our times. Was an oft-voiced rumor around the town. She believes there are layers to reality, much like the skin of an onion. And the afterlife is one of those layers, and Maud is able to vibrate at the same speed as the afterlife and shaking those layers loose. Mother had made the most of her brief meeting with Tesla, and did nothing to disillude anyone that she was indeed a deep student of science, and that her mystical methods incorporated the latest theories. There is an intersection of science and spiritualism, she claimed to a client. Journey of a spirit can be thought of as a science we do not yet understand, in just the same way as Nikola Tesla is forging new frontiers in the field of electricity. He pulls electric power from waterfalls and the sky. I pull spirit power from the beyond. It was a passive speech that she seemed sincere when she told it to every one of her clients. But when I showed her the article I was pulling out of the paper about Tesla, she was fairly uninterested. "That's nice, Jane. Interesting. I suppose I thought I didn't quite understand it," she would say, and then go about her business without further comment. When I was 8, I found an article in which Tesla claimed he had invented a wireless telephone. Though we had no telephone yet in Spiritvale, the landscape of the outside world was more and more strung with ugly telephone wires, festooned from pole to pole along the main road. When I told Mother, she was attentive and took the article from me. By the next day, she had acquired a telephone receiver. I'm incorporating it into my, and I was sure she was about to say into my act, into my spirit work. It will be a fine tool to contacting the beyond. Through the years, when I decided that Mother was a complete fake, she would do something so uncanny that I was sure she had the gift. The letter came from Gertrude Treadwell telling Mother that her sister Julia Treadwell had passed on. As Mother had predicted, Mother sighed. "The gift, I feel more like a curse sometimes," she had commented. One time I listened to the door and heard a seance in which a woman and her husband sought to speak to a wealthy aunt who had passed on. There was trouble over her will, and they wanted cleared up. The aunt failed to show herself, but when the woman decided, first husband came by to reveal that the woman had once been a snake charmer in a carnival act. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle the rising giggle this delirious, unexpected revelation inspired. There was a drawn-out pause, and I could easily imagine the poor husband gasping at his wife in stunned horror. "But, Maybelle, you told me you were living in a convent up until we met," he cried at last. I sputtered hard into my hand, clutching my mouth to stifle my laughter, despite not to reveal that I was there eavesdropping. Then Maybelle, the wife, broke down and admitted that the truth was when the spirit, speaking through Mother, began to recall details of their carnival life together. I jumped away from the door as Maybelle abruptly hurried her living husband out before her chatty spirit ex could reveal too much more. "How did you know all that?" I asked Mother after they'd left. Mother simply stared at me, perplexed by the question. "I didn't know it. The spirit of her late husband told me." Despite my confusion about the validity of its main industry, in those days Spiritvale was a child's dream. For one thing, folks swarmed to the town, often as a stop on their trips to the Niagara Falls, only an hour away, seeking consultation with their loved ones who had passed on and advice from the spirit guides. One time, When I was 10, I sat on the porch beside Mother as she rocked in a rocker. "Can you contact our father?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, I've tried. I believe it means he's moved on. It's what a spirit should do. Only restless spirits with unfinished business stay behind." "Didn't he want to stay with us?" I wanted to know. This was more a matter of curiosity than heartfelt longing on my part. Mother looked down at me and smiled a little sadly. "Your father could move to the beyond because he knew we'd be fine. You're fine, aren't you, Jane?" "I suppose so," I replied after a moment of thought. "I don't sound certain," she noted. I shrugged. It might be nice to live in a place where the dead stay dead and don't speak. "Don't call them the dead," she corrected me. "I'm sorry, I meant those who have passed over." "Better." "I'd like to go to school, I think," I mentioned. "You'd be bored in school. I've taught the 5 of you to read, write, and do figures better than you have learned in school." But it wasn't the learning that appealed me. It was the sheer ordinariness of the situation. I was slowly developing a burning desire to be normal. "Don't you want to get married again?" I inquired shyly, with a sidelong glance to gauge Mother's reaction to this question. "No, Jane, I don't," she said. "I'm happy with no husband to give me orders. It was bad enough that as a woman I can't vote. At least not being married gives me some autonomy. I am my own woman at last." From June to late August every year, the town boomed with visitors, and there were not enough rooms to accommodate them. Even the huge Spirit Hotel was filled to capacity. Residents of Spirit pitched tents for their children in order to rent their rooms out to the tourists. Imagine, if you can, children running freely through summer woods in nightshirts, catching fireflies in jars, not chaperoned by any adult at all, while the streets were illuminated in the carnival atmosphere of people walking from home to home, shop to shop, sampling the various mystical services offered. Tarots, palm readings were given on porches. In some shops, spirit photos could be purchased whereby a person had his or her picture taken with a special camera. More times than not, in fact, almost always, a hazy white blur of a spirit figure would be captured by the lens as it hovered around the photographed subject. Princess Running Deer husband, White Wild Elk, owned one of these studios. Mimi and I ran errands for him one summer, which gave us access to the dark room where he processed the photos. One day, Mimi found his collection of spirit negatives, pictures of other people who could be superimposed on the photos to make it appear that spirits hovered in the air around the person being photographed. Some kind of wiping technique had been used to blur the distinctive features of the person in the spirit negative so that they might appear to be almost anyone. In a square outside Town Hall, free reading would be given by several mediums at once. We would hover at the fringes of the crowds, unabashed by being dressed in only our night clothes, hugging our blinking jars with care, watching the mediums work their trade. I'm getting a JR, either the initials or a junior, can't be sure. Does that make sense to anyone? Junior or JR, it's a male? Invariably someone would respond something like, "My son was John Robert Jr. He was young when he died. Yes, yes." On occasion, when we'd watch scenes such as that, Mimi would roll her eyes, something I was noticing her do increasingly frequently the older we grew, and make a dull comment such as, "No kidding, anyone could have figured that out. Look how young the mother is." That we were flittering in the shadows like so many fairy spirits on the nights was not lost on several enterprising mediums. We were often bribed with promises of fresh-made ice cream and fried dough that was served from carts on the streets to perform simple services. One night, several of us, Mimi, Emily, Emma, me, and a number of other local children, were assigned to stand at the window and stare at the black shade covering it. We had been instructed to uncap our jars of fireflies in the moment the shade went up, and while we did this, releasing the rising cloud of shimmering fireflies in front of the window, shrieks erupted from the room within, following orders, and then we sped off into the woods behind like so many escaping ghosts. This is how I grew up.